What kind of world rings when struck? What kind of body, suspended in the void, answers a violent blow not with silence, but with song? This is not a riddle. It is not metaphor. It is the record of a moment, carved into the data of a mission meant to map the silence of space. The moon, that ancient companion above our heads, has always been a symbol of stillness, unchanging, eternal, passive. But when humanity reached it in the final years of the 1960s, when we touched its dust and hammered into its crust, we found something the poets had not imagined, something the scientists had not expected. We found that when struck, the moon sang. The Apollo astronauts did not set out to solve a cosmic mystery. Their task was simple, pragmatic, almost clinical. Place instruments, measure tremors, map the subtle quakes of a lifeless world. But sometimes, it is precisely when we ask small questions that the universe answers with a thunder we cannot explain. A rocket stage, deliberately crashed into the lunar surface, was supposed to behave like a hammer falling onto stone, a quick thud, a brief tremor, and silence. But that silence never came. Instead, the moon reverberated. It shuddered like a cathedral struck by a great bell. The sound waves did not die down. They echoed. They multiplied. They circled the body again and again. The moon rang for nearly an hour, as though hollow, as though resonant, as though built not of silence, but of music. On Earth, no such thing is possible. Here, tremors are absorbed quickly. Earth's oceans drink the energy. Its molten core diffuses the movement. Its tectonic plates scatter the waves like broken glass, scattering light. Earth quakes and then grows quiet. But the moon has no such oceans. It has no molten heart to absorb its trembling. It is dry, brittle, cold. Its very bones are different. And so, the waves that begin there do not stop. They circle and circle, fading only slowly, as though reluctant to die. Scientists had predicted longer quakes, yes, but not this. Not a resonance so strange it could only be compared to metal. Not a ringing so uncanny that the only metaphor left was music. The phrase came from a NASA scientist, careful, restrained, and yet unable to deny what he felt. It rang like a bell. Imagine the unease in that control room. Scientists trained to deal in precision, forced to fall back on metaphor. Engineers who lived by numbers suddenly reaching for poetry to explain what their machines had recorded. To say the moon rang like a bell was not to dress up the truth. It was the truth. A bell had been struck. A song had been heard. And the question, hanging in the silence, was unavoidable. What kind of world behaves this way? The astronauts themselves were far away by then, their boots pressing into dust older than Earth's continents, their gloved hands planting flags, their words bouncing back to Earth in grainy transmissions. They saw only a silent desert, but they were walking on an instrument. Every step echoed into instruments buried in the crust, every movement folded into data. And what came back to Houston was not a portrait of dead stone, but a whisper that refused to end. The moon was not what we thought it was. Long before Apollo, long before rockets or even telescopes, humanity had already felt the strangeness of the moon. Ancient myth spoke of it as a lantern carried by gods, a mirror suspended by spirits, a polished disk set deliberately in the heavens. The Babylonians recorded its cycles with fearful awe. The Greeks imagined it as a goddess who listened. Native American traditions spoke of it as a guardian. What if these stories, dismissed as myth, were echoes of a deeper intuition? That the moon was not simply a stone, but something placed, something deliberate. When Apollo's instruments reported their eerie resonance, it was as though science had stumbled upon an old memory the human imagination had never quite let go of. The Apollo passive seismic experiment was meant to bring closure, to answer questions, not to open them. The plan was simple: install seismic sensors, measure lunar quakes, build a model of the moon's interior. But what the instruments returned was the opposite of closure. It was astonishment. When the spent rocket stage crashed, the sensors recorded signals that grew louder with time instead of fading. Waves that circled the globe not once, but again and again, bouncing as though the moon were an echo chamber. Scientists compared it to striking a drum, others to listening to a bell. The ringing lasted for 55 minutes before it faded into silence. And even in the silence, a question remained. Was the moon hollow? Was it layered in metals? Was it structured in some way that magnified vibration, as though it had been engineered rather than born? When the Apollo 13 crew, forced to abort their landing, sent their booster crashing into the moon, the effect was even stranger. The vibrations lasted for more than 3 hours. The moon sang longer, louder, stranger than before. Each new strike only deepened the mystery. Instead of silence, the moon responded with a hum that refused to end. The metaphors multiplied. A bell, a gong, a machine, something built to resonate, something waiting to be awakened. The more scientists listened, the more uncomfortable they became. A hollow world is not supposed to exist. A machine in orbit is not supposed to exist. And yet the data was there, humming in their ears. What are we to do with such a fact? To dismiss it as anomaly? To bury it in footnotes? Or to face the possibility that the moon, the most familiar presence in our sky, is more than it seems? Think of it, a body that lights our nights, guides our tides, steadies our planet, and yet may not be a mere accident of cosmic chance. Think of a world that may be both lantern and lock, both companion and question. Humanity has always told itself that the moon is a guide. But what if it is also a signal? What if its ringing is not an accident, but a message? As children, we gaze at it through bedroom windows, tracing craters with our eyes, whispering secrets to its light. As lovers, we count its phases, measuring our nights by its glow. As civilizations, we once carved calendars into stone, planted crops, waged wars, and told stories by its waxing and waning. And all this time it has been there, silent to our ears, but not to itself. Could it be that the moon has always been ringing, always vibrating, always speaking in frequencies we could not hear? And once we finally learned to listen, what did we hear but a truth too large to hold? There are questions that fracture the comfort of existence. To ask them is to peel away the illusion that the universe is stable, predictable, already understood. When the Apollo astronauts reported their instruments' findings, some scientists smiled nervously, some shrugged, some went pale. Hollow planets do not exist. Bells are human inventions. Machines are made by hands. But the moon had behaved like all three. And so, the mind rebels. Where does that leave us? Are we the only storytellers here? Or have we simply stumbled into a story much older, one written in stone and silence and echo? The moon's ringing has been explained in many ways. Some say it is simply the result of a dry, fractured body that transmits seismic waves with unusual efficiency. Some say its peculiar composition, a crust dense with metals, is enough to explain the resonance. But even these explanations do not erase the unease. For even if the moon is not hollow, even if it is not a machine, why should it sing this way at all? Why should it answer humanity's strike with a voice? Why should the most familiar body in our sky reveal itself in a way no other world has? We are left with the dissonance of fact and feeling, the fact that the moon rang and the feeling that something about it is wrong. Listen closely, not with ears, but with imagination. The moon still hangs there, pale and calm, circling above the oceans of Earth. But somewhere within its silence is a memory, a vibration that once rang out when humanity struck it. The hum is gone now, but its echo remains, not in stone, but in the questions it opened. What kind of world rings like a bell? What kind of neighbor in the sky refuses to behave like stone? And if the moon is more than what it seems, who or what placed it there? Our journey begins in that resonance, in that hum across the void, in the bell that rang and would not be silenced. From here, the story only deepens. From here, we follow the echo. The hum did not end with a single strike. Apollo returned again and again to the question, as though compelled to knock on the moon's door until it gave a clearer answer. Each time, the response was the same, an echo that refused to die, a trembling that seemed to swell instead of fade. If the first encounter was the shock of impact, this was the long listening afterward, the moment when silence itself becomes strange. What exactly was vibrating beneath the astronauts' feet? What interior was speaking back? The moon, a body we had thought of as still, was proving to be a resonant chamber. Something within it was built not to swallow sound, but to carry it. And once it began, it did not want to stop. The instruments NASA had planted on the surface were delicate, able to hear whispers we could not. They picked up the shuffle of footsteps, the quiet sigh of dust disturbed by boots, the subtle cracking of rock beneath the blazing heat of day. They could even hear the moon's own faint quakes, tiny tremors caused not by tectonic fury, but by the simple expansion and contraction of rock under extremes of cold and heat. But when Apollo's discarded rocket stages fell, when deliberate impacts shook the ground, the sensors recorded not whispers, but roars. Waves of vibration raced outward, circling the moon, refusing to fade. It was as though the interior of the body itself had been waiting to sing. Scientists were baffled. On Earth, seismic waves behave with comforting predictability. Compressional waves, called P waves, pass through solids and liquids alike. Shear waves, or S waves, pass only through solid. By comparing the two, we can see Earth's heart, its liquid outer core, its convecting mantle, its fractured crust. But on the moon, the waves disobeyed. They traveled farther than expected. They lingered. They rebounded in patterns that suggested vast voids, or ordered layers that did not match natural formation. The moon did not map neatly into a solid planet. Instead, it echoed like something built for resonance. One Apollo seismologist put it bluntly, "It was as if the moon had a rigid outer shell and was hollow inside." The phrase haunted those who heard it. NASA would soften the wording later, offer models of fractures, argue for geological oddities. But the original words could not be erased. Hollow inside. They lodged themselves into the imagination. To speak of a hollow world is to cross from science into myth, into speculation, into the realm where fiction asks questions science is too cautious to. And yet, the phrase was born not from rumor, but from data. The moon was behaving like an empty vessel. The resonance itself became a character in the Apollo story. When the Apollo 12 crew crashed their lunar module into the surface, the vibration lasted nearly an hour. When Apollo 13's booster struck, the ringing endured for more than 3 hours. Imagine a world humming for hours on end, refusing silence, its body behaving like a bell struck by a cosmic hand. Scientists compared notes, each searching for a metaphor: a bell, a gong, a drum, a machine. They circled back again and again to the same language, because nothing else sufficed. A bell rings because it was built to, and so the unsettling implication hovered in the silence. Was the moon built to ring? Consider the symbolism of bells. On Earth, bells mark beginnings and endings. They toll for death, and they ring for life. They call to prayer, they summon to war. They mark the hours slipping away. A bell is vibration infused with meaning. To imagine the moon as a bell is to imagine that every strike, every tremor, is part of a signal too large for us to understand. Perhaps accident. Perhaps intention. Perhaps a language written in resonance, waiting for an ear tuned finely enough to hear. The question is not only whether the moon rang, but why its ringing unsettles us so deeply. Some scientists clung to geology. They pointed to the dryness of lunar rock, to the absence of water that on Earth damps vibration, to the rigidity of a crust forged in fire and frozen forever. They suggested that waves traveled easily through this brittle stone, that fractures carried sound like channels. These explanations soothed some, but not all. For even if the moon's composition was peculiar, even if its rocks were to blame, why did the resonance feel so deliberate? Why did it last so long, like a bell tuned to sustain a note? Even those offering explanations admitted the unease. The moon behaved too perfectly like an instrument. The deeper disturbance is not scientific, but existential. To discover that the moon does not behave as expected is to feel the floor shift beneath human certainty. If the moon is hollow, or if it rings by design, then we must ask who or what designed it. And if it is an accident, then what kind of cosmos produces accidents that mimic intention so closely? We are left caught between science and myth, both whispering the same thought. The moon is not only what it seems, and so segment 2 is an echo chamber, not only of seismic waves circling a body of dust and stone, but of questions circling human minds. Why is the moon exactly the size to eclipse the sun so perfectly, lining up in a geometry that feels scripted? Why does it steady Earth's axis with such care, preventing the wild tilts that would make life impossible? Why are some of its rocks older than Earth itself? Each fact may stand alone with explanation, but together they resound like overlapping notes, building a chord too strange to dismiss. The moon is more than companion. It is puzzle, it is echo, it is song. The Apollo missions ended, but the echoes did not. The seismometers remained, listening for years, transmitting faint signals back to Earth. They heard the moon's thermal quakes, the groans of its body as it expanded and contracted. They heard impacts of meteorites, sudden, violent, ringing the shell like mallets on a drum. Again and again, the moon answered with resonance. The instruments were eventually switched off, silenced by funding cuts and waning interest. But the data remains, and the unease remains. We struck the moon, and it rang. We listened, and it did not stop. Even now, decades later, the echo lingers, in memory, in speculation, in the haunting sense that the most familiar object in our sky is still singing a song we cannot yet understand. So what lies beneath the surface? What chambers or fractures carry the sound? What design, natural or otherwise, makes an entire world into an instrument? These are not questions with easy answers. They are questions that resonate like the moon itself, circling, echoing, refusing to fade. The story of the moon's resonance is not finished. It is still humming, softly, waiting for us to listen more deeply. And as long as it hums, humanity will wonder, what is the moon really? And why does it refuse to stay silent? By the time the Apollo missions ended, the echoes had done more than shake instruments. They had shaken certainty itself. The moon had rung like a bell, and once that fact entered human history, it refused to leave. Scientists debated, journalists speculated, and somewhere between science and story, a hypothesis emerged, one so audacious, so unsettling, that to even speak it aloud felt like trespass. What if the moon is not solid? What if it is, in some profound sense, hollow? By the time the Apollo missions ended, the echoes had done more than shake instruments. They had shaken certainty itself. The moon had rung like a bell, and once that fact entered human history, it refused to leave. Scientists debated, journalists speculated, and somewhere between science and story, a hypothesis emerged, one so audacious, so unsettling, that to even speak it aloud felt like trespass. What if the moon is not solid? What if it is, in some profound sense, hollow? The hollow moon hypothesis did not come from wild dreamers alone. It had its roots in careful measurements, in density readings that seemed too low, in orbital behaviors that seemed too precise, in the long resonance that defied expectations. Soviet scientists in the 1960s dared to say it aloud. They studied the moon's motion, its unlikely orbit, its strange balance of mass, and they asked, could it be a construction, or could it be, in some unfathomable way, an artifact rather than an accident? The hollow moon hypothesis did not come from wild dreamers alone. It had its roots in careful measurements, in density readings that seemed too low, in orbital behaviors that seemed too precise, in the long resonance that defied expectations. Soviet scientists in the 1960s dared to say it aloud. They studied the moon's motion, its unlikely orbit, its strange balance of mass, and they asked, could it be a construction? Could it be, in some unfathomable way, an artifact rather than an accident? In 1970, two Soviet researchers, Michael Vasin and Alexander Shcherbakov, published an article in Sputnik magazine that stunned readers around the world. They suggested that the moon might be a hollowed-out planetoid, a structure created by an advanced civilization and placed in orbit around Earth. They called it a spaceship moon. The idea was dismissed by many as science fiction, but it carried the weight of their nation's scientific community, and it could not be laughed away so easily. For even as others dismissed it, the resonance of Apollo seemed to support it. The ringing that refused to die became the drumbeat beneath their speculation. In 1970, two Soviet researchers, Michael Vasin and Alexander Shcherbakov, published an article in Sputnik magazine that stunned readers around the world. They suggested that the moon might be a hollowed-out planetoid, a structure created by an advanced civilization and placed in orbit around Earth. They called it a spaceship moon. The idea was dismissed by many as science fiction, but it carried the weight of their nation's scientific community, and it could not be laughed away so easily. For even as others dismissed it, the resonance of Apollo seemed to support it. The ringing that refused to die became the drumbeat beneath their speculation, a spaceship moon. The phrase alone invites wonder and dread. If true, it would mean that every night of human history, we have looked not at a natural satellite, but at a machine. That our myths of gods placing lanterns in the sky were not just metaphors, but memories of something stranger. that the perfect eclipses we marvel at are not coincidences of geometry, but deliberate alignments, that the tides that cradle life itself are driven by a design older than humanity. What would it mean if the moon is not a rock, but a bell deliberately hung above us? What would it mean if we have always lived beneath an artifact, a spaceship moon? The phrase alone invites wonder and dread. If true, it would mean that every night of human history, we have looked not at a natural satellite, but at a machine. That our myths of gods placing lanterns in the sky were not just metaphors, but memories of something stranger. That the perfect eclipses we marvel at are not coincidences of geometry, but deliberate alignments. That the tides that cradle life itself are driven by a design older than humanity. What would it mean if the moon is not a rock, but a bell deliberately hung above us? What would it mean if we have always lived beneath an artifact? Skeptics were quick to respond. They spoke of density anomalies explained by iron-rich minerals, of orbital precision explained by celestial mechanics, of resonance explained by brittle stone. But even their explanations seemed strained, as though spoken too quickly, as though intended as shields against the deeper unease. For the hollow moon hypothesis was more than a scientific question. It was a psychological tremor. It asked us to consider that the most intimate companion of Earth may not be what we think it is. It asked us to imagine that someone or something placed it there. Skeptics were quick to respond. They spoke of density anomalies explained by iron-rich minerals, of orbital precision explained by celestial mechanics, of resonance explained by brittle stone. But even their explanations seemed strained, as though spoken too quickly, as though intended as shields against the deeper unease. For the hollow moon hypothesis was more than a scientific question. It was a psychological tremor. It asked us to consider that the most intimate companion of Earth may not be what we think it is. It asked us to imagine that someone, or something, placed it there. Consider how strange the moon truly is. It is too large for a planet of Earth's size to capture easily. Its orbit is too circular for chance. Its density is far lower than expected, as though something is missing within. Its crust is asymmetrical, thicker on the far side, thinner on the side that faces us, as though engineered to balance. And then there is the great coincidence. The moon is exactly the right size and distance to cover the sun perfectly in eclipse. No other moon in the solar system does this for its planet. It is a coincidence so uncanny it feels designed. Consider how strange the moon truly is. It is too large for a planet of Earth's size to capture easily. Its orbit is too circular for chance. Its density is far lower than expected, as though something is missing within. Its crust is asymmetrical, thicker on the far side, thinner on the side that faces us, as though engineered to balance. And then there is the great coincidence. The moon is exactly the right size and distance to cover the sun perfectly in eclipse. No other moon in the solar system does this for its planet. It is a coincidence so uncanny it feels designed. The hollow moon hypothesis takes these facts and dares to weave them together. Perhaps the moon is not natural at all. Perhaps it was hollowed out long ago, placed in orbit as a stabilizer, a watcher, a bell that would ring when struck so that its creators would know it was still alive. Perhaps the ringing Apollo heard was not anomaly, but intention. A chime built into the structure, like a tuning fork reminding us of its presence. The hollow moon hypothesis takes these facts and dares to weave them together. Perhaps the moon is not natural at all. Perhaps it was hollowed out long ago, placed in orbit as a stabilizer, a watcher, a bell that would ring when struck so that its creators would know it was still alive. Perhaps the ringing Apollo heard was not anomaly, but intention. A chime built into the structure, like a tuning fork reminding us of its presence. Such thoughts disturb because they shift humanity from the center of its story. If the moon is a machine, then we are not alone. If it was placed, then someone placed it. If it was hollowed, then some intelligence capable of planetary engineering existed before us. And if that intelligence still listens, then every eclipse, every tide, every gaze into the night sky is part of a conversation we do not understand. Such thoughts disturb because they shift humanity from the center of its story. If the moon is a machine, then we are not alone. If it was placed, then someone placed it. If it was hollowed, then some intelligence capable of planetary engineering existed before us. And if that intelligence still listens, then every eclipse, every tide, every gaze into the night sky is part of a conversation we do not understand. Mainstream science rejects the hollow moon hypothesis, and perhaps it should. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. But the claim persists, not because it is proven, but because it resonates. It resonates the way the moon itself resonates. Every time we look up, the image of a hollow lantern whispers in the back of the mind. Every time we remember the bell-like ringing, the idea returns. And so, it lingers, like an echo that refuses to die. Mainstream science rejects the hollow moon hypothesis. And perhaps it should. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. But the claim persists, not because it is proven, but because it resonates. It resonates the way the moon itself resonates. Every time we look up, the image of a hollow lantern whispers in the back of the mind. Every time we remember the bell-like ringing, the idea returns. And so it lingers, like an echo that refuses to die. Segment 3 is not about proving the hypothesis true or false. It is about acknowledging the shadow it casts. The moon's resonance invited the question. The anomalies invite speculation. And speculation, once begun, does not end easily. To imagine a hollow moon is to imagine that we live beneath a sky already altered, already prepared, already scripted. It is to imagine that the human story has always unfolded under the gaze of something older, greater, stranger. And once that thought enters, it cannot easily be erased. Segment 3 is not about proving the hypothesis true or false. It is about acknowledging the shadow it casts. The moon's resonance invited the question. The anomalies invite speculation. And speculation, once begun, does not end easily. To imagine a hollow moon is to imagine that we live beneath a sky already altered, already prepared, already scripted. It is to imagine that the human story has always unfolded under the gaze of something older, greater, stranger. And once that thought enters, it cannot easily be erased. When the astronauts of Apollo bent down and gathered the moon in their hands, they believed they were touching certainty. Rock is rock, dust is dust, and the moon was supposed to be nothing more than ancient stone. But when those samples came home, when they were split, studied, measured, and weighed, they whispered a different story, one far stranger than anticipated. For the moon's very matter carries anomalies, quiet contradictions that refuse to align with Earth's story. The dust clings as though alive, the rocks weigh heavy with metals that should be scarce, and their isotopes tell tales of origins that stretch beyond what textbooks allow. If the moon is a hollow bell, then these are the chimes scattered across its surface, stone and dust that echo with questions we are not ready to answer. The rocks themselves were a shock. Some were older than any rocks found on Earth, their crystallization dating back 4.5 billion years, whispering of times before our continents existed. To hold a lunar rock was to hold a fossil of the solar system itself, a time capsule sealed long before human eyes ever gazed upward. But within those rocks lay strangeness. They were riddled with titanium in quantities that astonish scientists, concentrations far higher than what is found in Earth's crust. Some samples bore unusual metals, rare on Earth, but abundant here, as if the moon had been forged from a recipe no terrestrial geologist would dare imagine. Why should a dead satellite contain such abundance? Why should its chemistry look so alien? And then there were the isotopes. On Earth, the ratio of oxygen isotopes is distinct, a fingerprint of our planet's birth. Mars, too, carries its own isotopic signature. But the moon? Its oxygen isotopes are almost identical to Earth's, so identical that they appear to have been cut from the same cloth. This led to the giant impact hypothesis, the idea that a Mars-sized body once collided with Earth, ejecting debris that coalesced into the moon. But even this story does not rest easily. For if the moon is Earth's child, why does it carry metals in strange abundance? Why is its density so low, as though something has been scooped out from within? Why does it look both familiar and foreign, kin and stranger at once? The dust was stranger still. Astronauts cursed it, for it clung to everything. It coated their visors, crept into their lungs, scratched the glass of their helmets. It carried an electric charge, as though alive with static, refusing to fall like ordinary dust. Some described it as smelling faintly of gunpowder, though no combustion had touched it for billions of years. The dust was jagged, sharp, unweathered by wind or water, a powder that cut like glass. It clung to skin, to instruments, to memory. To walk on the moon was to be haunted by its dust, to carry its presence home in every fold of fabric. Even today, lunar dust sits sealed in laboratories, still capable of damaging what touches it, still whispering of a world where every grain is a splinter of mystery. Scientists attempted to explain. They spoke of the lack of atmosphere, of solar radiation charging the dust, of ancient volcanism producing odd minerals. And yet the explanations never settled the unease. Why so much titanium? Why such peculiar isotopes? Why dust that behaves like no dust on Earth? To dismiss each anomaly alone is possible, but to hold them together, side by side, is to feel the fabric of explanation fray. The moon is not just rock. It is anomaly embodied, contradiction given form, a body that insists on reminding us that it is more than stone. Consider the symbolism of dust. On Earth, dust is the end of things, decay, disintegration, the residue of time. But on the moon, dust is not an end but a beginning. It is the remnant of ancient impacts, the powder of creation, the splinters of a surface hammered by billions of years of violence. Each grain is older than our species, older than our oceans, older than memory itself. And yet, it behaves as though awake. It clings, resists, injures, unsettles. In that dust lies the intimacy of strangeness, the paradox of something so small, carrying questions so vast. Some scientists whispered comparisons to construction. The abundance of titanium, the hollow resonance, the odd isotopes. They resemble materials chosen, not random debris. Titanium is prized for its strength, its resistance, its endurance. Why should a dead satellite be armored in it? Is the moon merely an accident of chemistry? Or is it sheathed, protected, reinforced? Such ideas remain speculation, but speculation is difficult to silence when the facts themselves refuse simplicity. The moon seems too strange, too deliberate, too anomalous to be only accident. And yet, we must ask, do we project design because we fear randomness? Do we weave intention because anomaly unsettles us? Perhaps the moon is only the byproduct of cosmic violence, a child of collisions, scarred and imperfect, strange only because our expectations are narrow. But then again, perhaps not. Perhaps its rocks and dust are signatures not of chance, but of choice. The line between accident and intention is thin, and in the moon's anomalies, it blurs until even science begins to sound like myth. When Apollo ended, the rocks and dust remained. They are still studied, still tested, still revealing surprises decades later. Their secrets are not exhausted, their questions not closed. Every analysis leads to another puzzle. Every isotope measured, every mineral mapped, only deepens the mystery. The moon's surface is not mute. It is a library of contradictions, a record of something that does not align with the simple stories we tell ourselves about planets, about satellites, about chance. To hold a lunar rock is to hold the silence of a question. To inhale the dust is to taste the unease of something too old to understand. Segment 4 is about anomalies, but it is also about humility. For in the end, these rocks and this dust remind us that the universe does not conform to our expectations. The moon refuses to behave, refuses to fit neatly into models. It is a bell that rings when struck, a dust that clings like breath, a stone that carries metals from some other recipe of creation. It is, in every way, an object that resists being ordinary. And perhaps that is the truest anomaly of all, that the closest world to us, the body we believed we knew best, is still a stranger. Long before rockets, long before seismometers and isotopes, long before even the language of science was born, humanity already gazed at the moon with unease. It was lantern, goddess, mirror, and eye. It was worshipped, feared, and measured. But buried in the myths of ancient peoples are whispers of something stranger, stories that suggest the moon was not always there, tales that speak of a sky once bare, an earth that knew night without its glow, seas that moved without its pull. To imagine such a time is to unsettle the very rhythm of existence. And yet, these myths are not rare. They are scattered across continents, across centuries, across cultures that never knew one another. They whisper of a world before the bell was hung above us. The ancient Greeks preserved a fragment of memory in the writings of Arcadian lore. The Arcadians, it is said, were Proselines, people who lived before there was a moon in the heavens. Their myths speak of ancestors who walked the earth in a time when nights were lit only by stars, when darkness was more complete, when the balance of the world was different. To live before the moon was to live in a universe not yet finished. This was not metaphor for them, but memory. They carried it in their bloodlines, in their songs, in their identity. Before the moon, they said, as if recalling a chapter the rest of humanity had forgotten. In South America, the Chibchas of Colombia spoke of a time before the moon. They told stories of ancient ages when only the sun guided the world, and the moon was absent from the night sky. In Africa, the Zulu people told of an age when the moon arrived suddenly, brought and placed by trickster gods, cast into the heavens as a gift or a trap. The Maasai, too, spoke of a time when there was no moon, when darkness belonged fully to the stars. Across oceans, among people separated by distance and language, the stories repeat. There was a time before, and then the moon came. How could such tales be coincidence? How could cultures so distant weave the same idea, that the moon was not always there? Perhaps they are fragments of a deeper human memory, distorted into myth, but rooted in observation. Or perhaps they are allegories, metaphors for cycles of chaos and order, light and darkness. But when placed beside the anomalies of Apollo, the resonance, the dust, the isotopes, they seem less like imagination and more like testimony. Did our ancestors witness something? Did they inherit stories of a sky that changed, of a lantern that was hung deliberately above the earth? The myths do not stop at arrival. Some speak of the moon as watcher, as guardian, as judge. In Mesopotamia, the moon god's sin was both father and eye, watching humanity through endless cycles. In Mesoamerica, the moon was sometimes a mirror of blood, a wounded god cast into the sky to remind humans of sacrifice. In Polynesian traditions, the moon was a trickster, an entity that toyed with tides and time. Again and again, the moon is personified not as passive stone, but as active intelligence. It is an actor in the human story, not a background stage. And when myths insist on intelligence, we should listen. Not because they are literal, but because they tell us how humanity felt when it first measured itself against that silent disk. To live with the moon is to live with a constant rhythm. Its phases mark time, its gravity drives the seas, its eclipses inspire awe and terror. But to imagine life without it is to imagine a very different Earth. Without the moon, the nights would be darker, the tides weaker, the planet's tilt unstable. Seasons would swing wildly, climates would collapse. Some scientists even argue that without the moon, complex life may never have evolved. And so, when myths speak of a time before the moon, they are not merely curious, they are impossible. For life as we know it requires the moon. If there was a time before it, then perhaps humanity truly remembers a change so great that it rewrote the conditions of life itself. What if these myths are not imagination, but faint recollections of a cosmic event? What if the moon was captured by Earth's gravity long after life had begun? Some astronomers once suggested such theories, though they struggled with the mechanics of capture. But in myth, the mechanics do not matter. What matters is the memory of a before and an after. Before the moon, life was different. After the moon, a rhythm was imposed, a balance restored, or perhaps a balance created. The myths insist, the moon came, and nothing was the same. But the myths also carry fear. Many speak of the moon as dangerous, as deceptive, as tied to madness and death. The word lunacy itself is rooted in the belief that the moon alters minds. In folklore across Europe and Asia, the full moon is a moment when wolves howl louder, when transformations occur, when the veil between worlds thins. The moon was never trusted. It was a light, yes, but also a trap, a lure, a gaze. The myth suggests that humanity always suspected it was more than stone, that it had purpose, that its glow was a signal, not an accident. And so, Segment 5 brings together stone and story, dust and myth. The anomalies of science align uneasily with the whispers of legend. The moon that rang like a bell is the same moon that ancient people claimed had not always been there. The dust that clings like breath is the same dust that once arrived suddenly, according to the Zulu. The isotopes that confuse scientists are the same strangeness that inspired Greeks to call some of their ancestors before the moon. Science and myth are not identical, but they resonate like overlapping notes in the same chord. both whisper that the moon is not ordinary. Perhaps these myths are nothing more than dreams given form. Perhaps they are coincidences of imagination, proof only of humanity's hunger for story. But perhaps not. Perhaps they are fragments of a truth too large to hold directly, a truth carried in symbols and memory, passed across generations like a shadow of fact. If that is so, then the hollow moon is not just a hypothesis born in the 20th century, but a suspicion carried since prehistory. A suspicion that what hangs above us is not what it seems. Segment 5 is where the ancient voice meets the modern one, where Apollo's instruments hum in resonance with stories whispered around ancient fires, where myths of arrival and myths of deception intertwine with titanium-rich rocks and isotopic puzzles. The moon is not just anomaly, it is legend. And perhaps legend is the truest echo of all, for while instruments measure vibrations, myths measure awe. And in the end, both point to the same conclusion. The moon does not simply belong. It is visitor, it is intruder, it is lantern, it is lock. It is the one presence in the sky that still carries the weight of a question. The moon has always hung above us like a companion, but what if it is not a companion at all? What if it is a stranger, captured by Earth long after the story of life had already begun? To ask this is to step into another unsettling possibility, that the moon does not truly belong here, that it was once elsewhere, adrift, and then drawn into orbit in a way that defies the simplicity of chance. For while myths tell of a time before the moon, science too has wondered how it came to be where it is. And when we study its orbit, its balance, its peculiar perfection, we find not comfort, but strangeness. A captured stranger, circling with improbable precision. Consider first its size. No other planet in our solar system carries such a disproportionately large moon. Mars has 2 tiny companions, little more than asteroids. Jupiter and Saturn are swarmed with dozens, but all are small compared to their giants. Earth alone bears a moon so vast relative to its parent that it almost forms a double planet. This is odd enough, but odder still is the orbit itself. The moon does not wander in some eccentric path. It moves in a near-perfect circle, balanced in a way that seems engineered rather than random. Capture, according to celestial mechanics, should leave scars. A captured body should move erratically, wobble with eccentricity, display a history of struggle. But the moon does not. It circles smoothly, obediently, as though it had always been here, or as though someone placed it carefully. And then there is the eclipse. The coincidence is so staggering it feels less like mathematics and more like narrative. The moon is exactly the right size, at exactly the right distance, to cover the sun perfectly. No larger, no smaller. It can cloak the blazing star so completely that only the halo of the corona spills outward, a vision of fire surrounding blackness. What are the odds? Astronomers say it is coincidence, but coincidence this precise feels designed. No other planet enjoys such eclipses. Only Earth. Only us. We alone witness the universe staged in this way, as though for our eyes. To call it accident is to stretch belief. To call it design is to open doors we may not be ready to walk through. Theories of capture exist, but they strain under the weight of the evidence, for the moon is too large to have been easily snared by Earth's gravity. A body of its size, moving freely through space, would more likely slingshot away than settle into orbit. To be captured requires extraordinary circumstances. Massive energy loss, precise timing, a choreography of physics so unlikely it borders on the impossible. And yet, here it is. A stranger that should have slipped away, caught instead, and bound forever. Or was it caught at all? Was it guided? The giant impact hypothesis, now favored by many, suggests the moon was born of Earth's own flesh, that a world the size of Mars collided with our planet, flinging molten debris into orbit, which cooled and coalesced into the moon. It is an elegant story, but it too has fractures. For if the moon was Earth's child, why is it less dense, as though hollowed? Why does it carry metals in strange abundance? Why does it bear isotopic fingerprints so identical and yet carry its own anomalies? Even the impact theory feels incomplete, a tale with missing pages. And so, the possibility of capture lingers like an echo in the dark. The moon does not sit easily in our models. It remains misfit, intruder, guest. If the moon was captured, then the question sharpens. Captured by whom? By what? By accident or by will? Some see the orbit as too precise, too stable, too perfect to be left to chance. To them, the moon is not accident but artifact, a stabilizer placed deliberately to steady Earth's tilt, to calm its chaos, to allow life to flourish. Without the moon, Earth's axial tilt would wobble wildly. Climates would swing between extremes. Life might never have achieved complexity. With the moon, stability reigns. Was this balance the gift of accident or the hand of design? If it is design, then Earth itself is stage, and the moon is the prop hung above it. The capture hypothesis touches something primal in us. It recalls the myths of arrival, the stories of sudden placement, the legends of trickster gods casting the moon into the sky. It resonates with that unease humanity has always felt when gazing upward, the sense that we are being watched, that the glow is not passive but deliberate, a stranger's eye, captured but not conquered, circling endlessly. The moon does not simply illuminate, it gazes back. Its orbit is not just geometry, it is gesture. And what of its far side, the hemisphere we never see, hidden permanently from Earth's gaze? Locked away, its face forever turned from us. A true stranger's face, concealed, withheld. When Soviet spacecraft first photographed it, the world was stunned. It was nothing like the face we knew. No great seas, no familiar Maria, only a landscape of endless craters. It felt alien, as though we were glimpsing the body's secret side, the truth it had hidden for eternity. What kind of captured body conceals half of itself forever? What kind of neighbor allows us only one face? The moon shows us beauty, but hides something else. Segment 6 is about capture, but it is also about captivity. For if the moon was captured, then perhaps we are the captives. Our tides are chained to its pull, our nights defined by its cycles, our seasons stabilized by its presence. We are tethered to it as much as it is tethered to us. It circles us endlessly, and we circle it with our thoughts, our myths, our fears. Who captured whom? Is the moon our prisoner, or are we its audience, bound to its performance? In either case, the strangeness does not fade. The more we study its orbit, the more it looks like choreography. The more we measure its distance, the more it feels like design. Accident becomes harder to believe. Intention becomes harder to ignore. The moon as captured stranger is not just hypothesis. It is metaphor. It is the story of humanity itself, forever wondering whether we belong to a universe of chaos or to a stage prepared long before we arrived. And in the captured glow above, in the perfect eclipses that blind us with wonder, in the locked far side we will never see from Earth, the question lingers. Was the moon caught by Earth? Or was Earth caught by the moon? There are places on the moon where sunlight has never touched, craters so deep, so sharply walled, that their floors have lain in eternal night for billions of years. In those shadows, the temperature plunges to hundreds of degrees below freezing. Ice lingers there, unmelted, untouched, ancient. These regions are time capsules, but they are also mysteries, spaces where light itself is forbidden. To peer into them is to peer into absence, into silence, into places not meant for eyes. They remind us that the moon is not only familiar, it is also a world of secrets. The far side of the moon carries the same sense of forbidden distance. Locked by tidal forces, it has never faced Earth. For all of human history, half of the moon has been invisible, hidden as though deliberately concealed. When Soviet spacecraft first sent back images in 1959, the world gasped. The hidden face bore no great seas of lava, no familiar Maria, no man in the moon. It was a surface scarred beyond recognition, a wilderness of craters, harsh and alien. The moon we thought we knew was only half the story. The other half had been hidden, as though the body had chosen which mask to wear for Earth. What does it mean when a world reveals one face and withholds the other? Astronauts themselves felt this unease. When Apollo crews orbited to the far side, radio contact with Earth was lost. For nearly an hour, they were alone, cut off, circling a silence that felt deeper than distance. Some reported a sense of being watched. Some described it as oppressive, uncanny, unlike any other place. To float above a hemisphere no human had ever seen from Earth was to feel like trespassers in a territory that had never invited us. The far side was not simply another landscape. It was the forbidden half of a neighbor we thought we knew. In myth, Forbidden zones are always the places where secrets dwell, gardens with guarded gates, mountains where gods live, caves where monsters hide. The moon too carries such zones, its polar craters never lit, its far side never shown, its hidden depths never revealed. Science tells us these are accidents of geometry, of orbit, of tilt. But the human mind senses more. We feel that what is hidden for a reason. We sense intention in absence. The moon's secrecy becomes its own kind of message. Even the astronauts spoke in tones that betrayed awe. Buzz Aldrin described the far side as a monstrous visage. Others spoke of eerie radio disturbances, odd signals that interfered with their equipment. NASA dismissed these as static, anomalies of transmission. But to the men inside the capsules, alone and silent, it felt different. It felt as though the moon itself was speaking in frequencies they could not interpret. The forbidden zones were not mute. They hummed. They pressed against human presence. They reminded the astronauts that this was not our world. And in those permanent shadows, the mysteries deepen. Scientists have found deposits of water ice, ancient and undisturbed, holding within them records of the early solar system. But what else might those shadows contain? They are places of permanence in a universe of change, dark vaults that have never been seen by sun or man. If something were meant to be hidden, to be preserved, to be concealed, what better place than a crater floor never kissed by light? The moon guards its secrets not only by distance, but by darkness. Some speculate further. If the moon were ever used as station, as machine, as artifact, the far side would be the natural place to hide its workings. Out of Earth's sight, it could conceal structures, signals, devices. No telescope from the ground could ever reveal them. Only by crossing space could humanity peer over the edge of its own blindness. And even now, our glimpses are few, our missions rare, our answers incomplete. The forbidden zones remain forbidden, even when our machines visit them. They refuse to surrender meaning. But perhaps the greatest forbidden zone is not physical, it is psychological. It is the boundary where curiosity meets dread. To wonder too much about the moon is to cross into territory where science blurs into myth, where evidence shades into speculation, where every shadow seems like a secret. The moon invites us to question, but it also resists. It shows us anomalies, but denies us certainty. It gives us one face, but hides the other. It rings like a bell, but refuses to explain why. Its very nature is to be half seen, half hidden, always withholding. Segment 7 is about that withholding. It is about the zones of darkness that refuse light, about the faces that refuse to turn, about the signals that refuse clarity. The moon does not only illuminate, it conceals. It is a mirror and a mask, a lantern and a shadow, and the more we reach for it, the more it reminds us that some things are not meant to be held. Perhaps it is not that the moon has secrets, but that the moon itself is a secret, one revealed in parts, one concealed in halves, one forever reminding us that we are not meant to see everything. For centuries, we have called the moon a lantern, a mirror, a stone. But what if it is something else entirely? What if it is not a natural body, but a construct, a machine of unimaginable scale? To even form the words feels like trespass. Machines are made by hands. They are built with intent. To imagine the moon as machine is to imagine that it has purpose, function, design. And if it is designed, then someone designed it. To look up at the night sky and see not a world, but a device, is to feel the ground shift beneath human certainty. The idea sounds like fiction, and yet the anomalies align too neatly. The resonance when struck, like a bell built to amplify sound. The abundance of titanium, as though armored. The perfect orbit, as though tuned. The isotopic puzzles, as though assembled from multiple sources. The myths of arrival, as though memory. Piece by piece, the picture takes shape, not of a random rock, but of a machine disguised as one. If this is so, then the moon is not simply neighbor, it is artifact. And artifacts are built for reasons. What function could such a machine serve? Some speculate it is stabilizer, hung in orbit to steady Earth's tilt, ensuring climates remain hospitable, allowing life to flourish. Without it, Earth would wobble chaotically, its seasons violent, its balance fragile. With it, stability reigns. Could it be that the moon is a kind of cosmic governor, a mechanism designed to allow life? If so, then Earth itself is not mere chance, but part of an experiment or a garden. Others imagine the moon as an observation post, a watchtower placed to gaze upon Earth. Its far side, forever hidden, is the perfect place to conceal instruments. Its permanence makes it ideal. No atmosphere disturbs its silence. No life corrodes its structure. It circles endlessly, always facing us with one side, always hiding the other. What better platform could exist to observe, to listen, to record? If the moon is a machine, then perhaps we are not its masters, but its subject, living under the gaze of something older. There are stranger ideas still. Some envision the moon as a seed ship, hollowed to carry life across the stars, placed here to guide Earth's evolution. Others whisper of it as prison, cage, lock, designed to keep something in, or keep us from leaving. Bells do not only ring, they also call, they also warn. If the moon is a machine, then perhaps its ringing was not anomaly but message, a sound meant to echo across space, to signal still functioning circuits, to announce, it remains. Even the very surface seems to hint at machinery. Beneath the dust, radar has found structures of puzzling regularity. Some craters are too shallow for their diameter, as though something harder lies beneath, preventing deeper impact. Some ringed mountains rise with unnatural symmetry. Apollo astronauts described seeing flashes of light on the surface, bursts that could not be explained as simple reflection. Could these be emissions, discharges, activity? Machines do not sleep forever. Sometimes they stir. But the greatest machine is time. And if the moon is machine, then it has operated for billions of years. Longer than humanity, longer than Earth's civilizations, longer than even the continents we stand upon. A device so vast, so enduring, that it has outlived entire epochs of life. To imagine such a machine is to confront scale beyond comprehension. What kind of intelligence could build it? What kind of purpose could require it? And above all, are its functions still running? Some dismiss all of this, and perhaps rightly so. They say we see design where there is only accident. They say resonance is geology, titanium is chemistry, orbit is chance. But even as they dismiss, the idea lingers. It lingers because it feels too neat, too precise, too perfect to ignore. Machines are not only gears and circuits, they are symbols of intent. To believe the moon is machine is to believe we live not in chaos, but in design. And that design may not be ours. Segment 8 is not about proof, it is about possibility. It is about looking at the moon and daring to imagine that it is more than stone. It is about acknowledging that machines leave traces, echoes, anomalies, puzzles, and that the moon carries all of these. It is about the unease of realizing that if the moon is machine, then humanity has never truly been alone. We have always lived in the shadow of an artifact, and perhaps it still hums, still listens, still waits. To gaze upon the moon as machine is to feel the silence change. It is no longer passive, it is active. It is not background, it is foreground. It is not companion, it is structure. And as long as it circles us, the question will circle with it. What is the moon, and why was it made? Silence can be louder than words. In the story of the moon, what was not said, what was cut away, what was lost, sometimes speaks louder than what was recorded. The Apollo missions were humanity's boldest steps. Our footprints pressed into dust billions of years old. Every transmission, every photograph, every heartbeat was meant to be preserved. And yet, when history turned back to listen, some of those voices were gone, missing tapes, gaps in data, words spoken and then retracted. Apollo's record is not whole, it hums with absence. And absence invites suspicion. Consider the recordings of Apollo 11. Millions watched as Neil Armstrong set foot on the surface, his words etched forever. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. But not everything spoken was broadcast. NASA's public feed was carefully curated. Behind it, the astronauts carried private channels, moments of transmission not released in real time. Later, when some transcripts emerged, they hinted at unease, odd descriptions of lights, strange reflections, questions asked and quickly buried. Nothing conclusive, but enough to remind us that not all was shared. Silence wrapped around the words like a second atmosphere. Apollo 12 too carried mystery. When its seismometer heard the spent lunar module strike and the moon rang like a bell, the data was real, undeniable. But when the public asked for explanation, answers came slowly, couched in uncertainty, and then faded from headlines. The most haunting anomaly of the mission was allowed to slip into obscurity, as though someone chose not to amplify its resonance. A world had sung, and we had covered our ears. Apollo 13 never landed, but even its crisis carried whispers. The booster it discarded struck the moon harder than expected, producing the longest resonance ever recorded, more than 3 hours. Yet this too was downplayed. Reports framed it as quirk, as curiosity, not as puzzle. Even in the middle of near disaster, the moon's strange hum had revealed itself again. And again, it was folded into silence. Perhaps the strangest silence belongs to Apollo 17, the final mission. Astronauts reported flashes on the horizon, brief bursts of light that should not have been there. Some spoke of a lunar transient phenomenon, flickers, glows, movements on a world that was supposed to be still. Were these simply cosmic rays striking eyes? Or was the moon itself alive with hidden activity? The official record leans toward accident, but between the lines, the unease lingers. The moon refused to be mute, yet much of what it said was not carried into history's ear. And then there are the tapes. The Apollo missions generated thousands of hours of recordings, yet hundreds are missing, erased, reused, lost to time. NASA explains it as accident, bureaucracy, oversight. But to those who listen for echoes, the missing voices feel deliberate, as though some things were never meant to be replayed, as though some truths, once heard, were too heavy to keep. In every archive, in every absence, suspicion grows. What did they hear? What did they see? What do we not know? Silence also surrounds the astronauts themselves. Some, in later interviews, spoke in half-phrases, hints, metaphors. They described feelings of presence, the uncanny sense of not being alone. They chose words carefully, sometimes evasively. It was as though they had glimpsed something, but were unwilling or unable to give it shape. Officially, they saw nothing unusual. Unofficially, their hesitations told another story. Sometimes silence is a kind of testimony. Science, too, has grown quiet. After Apollo, the seismometers remained, listening. They recorded lunar quakes, meteor impacts, the hum of a world that never stopped vibrating. For years, the data flowed. But then, funding ended. The channels closed. The moon fell silent again. Not in truth, but in our ears. We chose not to listen. Or perhaps we were asked not to. Either way, the silence deepened. And when silence deepens, imagination fills the void. Segment 9 is not about conspiracies. It is about the human truth that silence unsettles us. When data is missing, when words are lost, when recordings vanish, the mind begins to weave shadows. Perhaps nothing was hidden. Perhaps everything missing was simply error. But in the context of a moon that rings like a bell, a moon that hides half its face, a moon that clings with dust like breath, the silences feel heavier. They feel like part of the design. In the end, Apollo gave us more than rocks and dust. It gave us questions that have never stopped echoing. But it also left us with silences, and those silences echo louder still. For when a machine hums and then the record cuts, we wonder what was clipped away. When voices tremble and then go quiet, we wonder what they dared not say. Silence, in its way, is another resonance. It lingers, it unsettles, it refuses to fade. And in the story of the moon, it is silence that speaks loudest of all. Every story must end. But the story of the moon does not end in answers. It ends, as it began, in echoes. From Apollo's seismic hum to the myths of people who remembered a sky without it. From dust that clings like breath to rocks armored with titanium. From eclipses too perfect to be chance to silences, too heavy to be accidents. The moon remains what it always was. A question. We set out to measure it, to map it, to master it. And instead it mastered us. The closer we came, the stranger it became. It is lantern, machine, stranger, mask. It is a mirror that does not reflect, but withholds. And yet, for all its strangeness, the moon has shaped us. It has steadied Earth's tilt, pulling chaos into balance. It has driven the tides, carving the rhythms of life. It has marked our calendars, guided our harvests, ruled our nights. Without it, we might not be here at all. If it is machine, then it is also midwife. If it is artifact, then it is also gift. If it is stranger, then it is also companion. For billions of years it has circled us, tethered to our oceans, our minds, our myths. Whether it came by chance or by design, its presence has defined us. But presence is not the same as knowledge. The moon resists. It reveals half its face and hides the other. It rings when struck, yet falls silent when asked. It gives us dust and stone, but dust that cuts and stone that confuses. It invites us closer, yet guards its shadows. Even in the age of machines that can cross interplanetary gulfs, the moon keeps its distance. We may land, we may measure, we may photograph, but we do not truly know. Its secret is not absence of data. Its secret is that every fact deepens the mystery. What then are we left with? Awe, unease, the understanding that we are smaller than we imagined, that the sky we thought we understood is stranger than we believed. The moon is not solved, and perhaps it never will be. Perhaps its purpose, if purpose exists, is to remain unanswered, a lock without key, a bell that rings but never tells us who struck it, a machine that hums but never explains its program. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They are meant to change us, to make us see the universe differently, to remind us that certainty is a fragile illusion. Look up at it now, tonight, tomorrow. Look not with the eyes of habit, but with the eyes of question. See not a familiar disk, but a riddle. See not a passive companion, but an active presence. The moon is not simply there. It is doing something, even if that something is only this, teaching us that not everything must yield to explanation. Some truths are too large, too strange, too ancient to fit into human words. The moon holds such truths in silence, in resonance, in shadow, and yet the echoes linger. Apollo's instruments have long gone quiet, their batteries dead, their voices silenced. But the memory of the ringing remains. It rang like a bell. It hummed like a machine. It shuddered like something hollow. Those words are still with us, carried through decades, whispered again and again. They haunt because they refuse to resolve. They remind us that the universe is not finished, not fully explained, not yet tamed. The moon is proof that mystery still survives. So the final echo is not sound. It is us. It is the echo of our questions, reverberating into the void, circling back without answer. We are the ones who ring when struck, vibrating with awe and fear at what we do not know. The moon has given us more than stone. It has given us the mirror of mystery, and as long as it circles above us, we will circle with it, haunted, inspired, unsettled, alive. This is how the story ends. Not with certainty, but with resonance. Not with silence, but with echo. The moon remains, lantern and machine, companion and stranger, question and answer all at once. And in its glow, we see ourselves, small, fragile, reaching, forever listening for a sound that has not yet faded.